In the timeless silence before civilization, when the stars still whispered to the mountains and the rivers ran without names, the world was barren. Vast plains of stone and dust, churning seas, and wind-blown skies untouched by laughter or sorrow. From the mists of primordial chaos emerged Nüwa, a radiant goddess with the face of a woman and the body of a serpent. Her presence shimmered with the grace of the heavens and the grounded wisdom of the earth. She wandered alone through the empty land, her serpentine tail gliding silently over ridges and valleys, her golden eyes reflecting both curiosity and longing. Though she was born of the divine forces that shaped the universe, Nuwa was unlike the other deities who reveled in power and distance. Her heart pulsed with an aching loneliness, a desire not for worship but for companionship, for voices to fill the stillness. She journeyed to the banks of the Yellow River, where warm clay pooled like sleeping earth. There, touched by inspiration and love, she knelt and began her sacred work. With her slender fingers, she lifted the soft clay and molded it tenderly into small figures, one by one. Each was shaped with intention: the curve of a brow, the angle of a jaw, the delicate sweep of arms pressed into being. These first humans were reflections of her divine care, unique in form and noble in spirit. When she finished each, she gently held it in her palms and blew a breath of celestial chi into it. The clay shimmered, trembled, and blinked into life, walking, wondering, marveling at the world with innocent eyes. But as the days passed and the solitary goddess looked upon her small tribe, she saw how they still roamed the vast wilderness alone, their numbers too few to fill the emptiness. Though her spirit was boundless, her hands could not work fast enough to keep pace with her vision. So Nuwa, ever resourceful, dipped a long vine into the river's muddy banks and snapped it in wide arcs, flinging droplets of clay across the land. Where each drop fell, a new human sprang forth, formed by chance, not design, shaped by the randomness of the river and the whip's motion. These new beings, though not as refined in detail, were filled with the same spark of life. They laughed, toiled, and danced with wild joy. They spread across the land in great numbers, and their diversity grew, some tall, others short, some loud, others quiet. They were strong, spirited, imperfect, and full of promise. Thus, two branches of humanity were born: the nobles, handcrafted with divine care, and the commoners, cast into the world by the sweep of Nuwa's vine. But Nuwa loved them all the same. In her eyes, each soul bore her essence. She smiled, not at their differences, but at the harmony they created together, a living, breathing mosaic of form and purpose. The once barren world now echoed with voices, footsteps, laughter, and song. And as Nuwa coiled atop a mountain to watch the sun rise over her children, the winds whispered a new name for the land: home. As the days lengthened and seasons found their rhythm, the world awakened into a tapestry of life. Verdant forests stretched toward the skies, rivers carved graceful paths through the land, and humans, Nuwa's cherished creations, built shelters, kindled fires, and wove stories beneath the stars. They learned to sing and to sow, to shape tools from stone, and to dance by moonlight. Their joy was raw and radiant, their lives fragile and new. From the heights of mist-shrouded peaks, Nuwa watched them with a mother's gaze, eyes filled with warmth, pride, and vigilance. Though she had breathed life into them, she did not reign as a distant deity. Instead, she walked the edges of their villages, unseen but ever near, guiding birds to lead lost travelers home, calming storms with her voice, and pressing her fingers into the soil to make it fertile. Her presence was a quiet force, like the hush before dawn or the gentle hush of wind in tall grass. In those early times, the gods and mortals lived side by side, not in hierarchy but in harmony. Some divine beings descended from the heavens to teach humanity the secrets of fire, music, and medicine. Others took animal forms and roamed the forests as protectors or guides. The celestial realms and the earthly planes breathed together as one, connected by unseen threads of balance, and Nüwa was the weaver of those threads. To ensure this fragile peace endured, Nüwa shaped the laws of nature with wisdom and care. She mapped the courses of the stars, so that night would follow day in faithful rhythm. She sang the tides into motion and carved the paths of wind, so they would dance gently over the earth instead of tearing it apart. Her influence stretched across all things, not as a ruler issuing commands, but as a guardian harmonizing the pulse of the world. When humans quarreled, she whispered dreams of empathy into their sleep. When beasts threatened their homes, she led them away with trails of blooming flowers. And when fear or greed began to stir in mortal hearts, she would rest her palm upon the earth, calming it like a heartbeat steadied by a gentle hand. The people, though unaware of the full truth of her form, sensed her in the world around them, in the bloom of spring, the protection of sheltering mountains, the kindness of strangers. They built quiet shrines of clay and stone, offering fruit, song, and firelight in thanks to the Great Mother of all life. This era became known as the Age of Harmony, a time when suffering was rare and the earth breathed evenly. Mortals flourished under the unseen care of Nuwa, and the celestial beings walked among them not as masters, but as kin. Under her ever-watchful gaze, balance endured, and the world spun in quiet joy. But harmony, like clay, is delicate, and even a most carefully woven fabric can fray. There was a time when the world pulsed like a heart in perfect rhythm. The sun rose each morning over fields golden with harvest, and at night, the stars sang softly above quiet villages nestled by rivers and hills. Nuwa walked among her children, not as a towering goddess, but as a gentle, radiant figure whose footsteps left blossoms in the grass and whose presence soothed the very air. Wherever she roamed, the land flourished. She moved through forests where great beasts stirred, speaking to them in a tongue older than words. At her touch, feral creatures calmed, their eyes softening, their hunger stilled. When rivers overflowed and threatened to swallow young farmland, she knelt beside their banks, whispered to their currents, and watched the waters recede like obedient children. When fire escaped its hearth and turned wild, she stilled it with a breath, letting its warmth remain but stripping away its rage. The humans she had shaped with her own hands, and those born of clay cast from her whip, gathered in her shadow to learn. She taught them the ways of growing grain and weaving cloth, of tending wounds with herbs and drawing music from hollow reeds. She showed them how to read the skies, when to plant and when to harvest, how to tell direction by the wind scent and the moss on stones. From her they learned not only how to survive, but how to live with kindness, reverence, and joy. In this world, the divine and the mortal coexisted like notes in a song. The gods did not reign with thunder or flame. They taught, wandered, listened, and played among the people. Birds carried messages between mountains and valleys. Rivers bore not only fish, but stories. The earth knew peace, and the heavens kept their silent vigil. Yet, even in paradise, change simmers. Nuwa felt it first. A subtle shift in the wind. The flicker of unease in the eyes of a dragon god as it flew north. The uneaten offerings left at ancient altars as some celestial lords grew prideful and distant. The stars, once steady in their paths, began to waver as though disturbed by unseen hands. Storm clouds began to gather in the far reaches of the sky, slow and gray at first, like a breath held too long. The wind carried strange murmurs. In dreams, the animals stirred restlessly. Somewhere, high in the celestial court, tensions crackled. Two mighty forces, Gong Gong, the god of flood and chaos, and Xuanxiu, the god of order and fire, had begun to clash in secret. Their dispute echoed louder with each passing day, hidden from mortal eyes but known in Nuwa's heart. She gazed at the sky one evening as lightning stitched the horizon in silence. Her tail curled protectively around a child sleeping by a fire. She pressed her hand to the earth, which trembled faintly beneath her touch. The world was still whole, still alive and singing, but the melody was thinning, notes stretching just beyond harmony. Nuwa, ever vigilant, knew peace was not permanent. She watched, waited, and prepared, her heart as calm as the rivers she once tamed, but her spirit bracing for the storm that would soon fall. Shall we now tell of the great calamity, when the sky broke, the earth cracked, and the world cried out for its mother? The harmony Nuwa had nurtured, the delicate balance she had woven into sky, stone, and soul, began to fray, not with a roar, but with a murmur. It began in the celestial court, high above the mortal realm, where the gods of order and chaos, flame and flood, watched the world from their thrones of cloud and jade. Zhuanshu, the strict sovereign of heaven, sought dominion over all things, stars, storms, and fate itself. To him, order was purity. Chaos was a stain to be cleansed. But Gong Gong, the horned god of water and wildness, refused to bow. He was the keeper of rivers and oceans, master of the untamable. To him, the world was meant to flow freely, not be caged. Their conflict was ancient and slow-burning, a war of wills and philosophies, but in time, tension ignited into fury. First, there were signs. The seas rose, tides swelling into cities with no wind to drive them. Fires flickered blue, unnatural and cold. Trees whispered of stars falling from their courses. Nuwa heard the warnings in every ripple of the river, in the shiver of wind through mountain passes. She climbed to the highest cliff and looked to the heavens, and what she saw froze her breath. A scar had opened in the sky, and from it war poured. Zhuanshu and Gong Gong collided in the clouds above the mortal world, their battle too vast for the eye, yet felt in every quake and roar. Thunder cracked like mountains breaking. Blades of flame slashed across the stars. Tidal waves rose, so high they kissed the sun. Gong Gong summoned tsunamis and whirlpools that swallowed forests whole, while Zhuanshu hurled celestial fire and divine wind, torching valleys and drying rivers to dust. Below, mortals screamed and scattered. The heavens groaned as they twisted and tore. One blow from Gong Gong's massive horn struck the pillar of heaven, Mount Buzhou, the sacred support that held the sky aloft. With a sound like 1,000 drums shattering, the mountain cracked and crumbled. The sky, once whole and arched, slumped to the northwest, leaving gaping holes where stars once shone. The earth, wounded and gasping, split open in the southeast, birthing chasms, floods, and fire. Day and night lost their rhythm. Rivers fled their paths. Flames burst from the ground as the world tore at its seams. Nuwa stood at the heart of this unraveling world, her face pale with grief. She saw her people clinging to what remained, hands reaching out, cries rising in the chaos. Her creatures were drowning, her forests burning. Everything she had made, the clay, the breath, the harmony, was breaking. But she did not flee. She did not despair. She began to mend. Above the trembling earth, the skies darkened not with rain, but with divine fury. Gong Gong, the god of floods and chaos, rose like a storm given flesh, his serpentine tail writhing behind him, his hair like riverweed dancing in a hurricane. His molten eyes burned with defiance, and from his mouth poured curses that churned the oceans and blackened the air. Across the sky stood his rival, Zhuanshu, the celestial emperor of fire and order, radiant and proud in armor etched with constellations. His voice crackled like thunder as he summoned the stars to his command, each one a blazing weapon against chaos. Their war was not fought with swords alone, but with forces that bound the universe. Gong Gong's every movement summoned floods that swallowed cities. He howled, and the rivers rose like serpents, drowning valleys and tearing trees from their roots. He struck the sea with his tail, and the water turned black and boiled. Creatures of the deep surged onto land, maddened and monstrous, answering the chaos he unleashed. Zhuanshu countered with columns of flame and lightning. He drew fire from the heart of the sun and rained it down in golden sheets. Mountains split, clouds screamed, and celestial fire lashed the earth. He called upon the northern winds, freezing oceans in moments, turning rain to daggers of ice. For days, or perhaps years, for time lost meaning, The heavens shook with their fury. Storm met inferno, and the sky screamed. Then came the moment that shattered everything. Defeated, humiliated, Gong Gong roared a final cry that echoed across heaven and earth. In his madness, his pride wounded deeper than any blade could cut, he hurled himself toward Mount Buzhou, the world pillar, sacred and eternal, the mountain that held the sky aloft. With a sound that split the firmament, he smashed his head against the mountain's roots. The world broke. Mount Buzhou cracked, its peak shattering into the clouds, and with it the sky tore open, sagging in the northwest like a collapsed ceiling. The earth heaved, fracturing in the southeast, as rivers changed course and volcanoes bled fire. Mountains fell into the sea. Forests were swallowed whole. Stars tumbled from their paths, their fire streaking across the heavens before vanishing into oblivion. Floods devoured entire provinces. Flames danced upon water, as if even nature had lost its laws. The balance Nüwa had nurtured was undone in moments. Humanity, her precious creation, was cast into ruin. The people cried out, clinging to trees that would soon be ash, huddling on mountaintops surrounded by endless water. Children screamed for mothers who had vanished into the waves. Villages collapsed into chasms. Hunger, fire, water, fear, all fell upon mortals at once. And Nuwa watched it all, heart-shattering with every scream. She stood among the ruins of the world she had shaped from love and clay. Her hands, once gentle, now trembled with grief. Smoke curled around her as if trying to blind her from the suffering. But she would not look away. She could not. Her children, nobles and commoners, strong and weak, crafted by her own fingers or the flick of her vine whip, were dying. And so, Nüwa, goddess of compassion, made her vow. If the heavens were broken, she would mend them. If the earth was cracked, she would seal it. If chaos reigned, she would restore balance, even if it cost her everything. Would you like the next part, where Nüwa undertakes her divine quest to repair the sky with sacred stones and the limbs of a great beast? The world was unrecognizable, a shattered canvas of fire, flood, and ash. Yet amidst the ruin, Nüwa did not falter. Her heart, once filled with the joy of creation, now beat with a solemn resolve. She stood alone among broken mountains and drowned valleys, her robes stained with the soot of burning forests, her hands muddy with the grief of a dying world. Above her, the sky sagged, cracked open like a broken bowl. Below, the earth bled, veins of molten rock spilling into chasms, rivers rushing where deserts once stood. But in the smoke and screams, Nüwa heard only one thing, the cries of her children. She knew the heavens would not mend themselves. The balance she once tended like a garden had been trampled by prideful gods. If no one acted, the world would end, not in a final flame, but in a long, slow dying. And so, Nüwa vowed to do what no god had dared, to repair the sky, to calm the earth, to save humanity. But such a task would require more than divine will. It would require the rarest essence of the world itself. She journeyed far and wide, her footsteps leaving glowing impressions in the scorched soil. First, she climbed to the broken peaks where the stars had fallen. From their craters, she gathered the 5 sacred stones, blue, red, yellow, white, and black, each pulsing with elemental force. These were no ordinary gems, but the bones of the cosmos, each attuned to a direction, a virtue, a balance. Then, she descended into the abyss where sky had met sea in ruin and found the great turtle Ao, a primordial beast, ancient as the stars. With sorrow in her heart, she took his 4 mighty legs, for only they could serve as the new pillars of the heavens. It is said Ao gave them willingly, understanding that for the world to live, he must fall. With sacred flame, she melted the stones. With divine breath, she shaped them anew. And with her tears, which fell endlessly, silently, she fused them into a celestial mosaic. But time was her enemy. The floodwaters continued to rise. Forests choked on smoke. And in the heavens, the tear widened, pulling stars into its void like a mouth-consuming light. Nuwa had only one chance. The gods watched from afar. The mortals prayed with every heartbeat. And so the goddess, weary but unbroken, lifted her creation skyward and began her final, sacred act. The sky above was a wounded beast, torn, bleeding starlight, sagging where once it arched proudly over the world. The earth groaned with every sunrise, trembling under the weight of imbalance. Humanity clung to life in pockets, scattered and silent. Their eyes turned to the heavens, hoping for mercy. It was not mercy that came. It was Nüwa. Her resolve was unshakable. She, the mother of mankind, once sculptor of clay and breath of life, now stood as a lone architect before the brink of annihilation. The world she had shaped with grace and joy now demanded pain, labor, and sacrifice to save. From the sacred 5 mountains, she gathered the stones of essence, blue for the sky, red for fire, yellow for earth, white for metal, black for water. Each pulsed with its own rhythm, echoes of the primordial forces. She carried them on her back through wastelands, across burning plains and flooded gorges, her footprints glowing in the broken soil. High on the last mountain peak, beneath a sky that wept fire, Nuwa built a furnace from dragon bone and phoenix ash. With divine breath, she summoned flames hot enough to melt time itself. Days passed like seconds as she toiled, her robe singed, her skin cracked, her divine essence draining with each strike of her hammer. Molten stone glowed like suns in her hands, and with every breath, she fused them into an ethereal patch, a radiant shield to mend the sky. But the heavens needed more than a patch. Their weight had crushed the horizon. The world sagged and twisted without its pillars. To lift the firmament again, Nuwa descended into the abyssal waters where Ao the giant turtle slumbered, a beast older than memory, whose legs touched both land and sea. With a silent prayer, Nuwa slew the great creature, her tears falling into the ocean as she severed its colossal limbs. Ao did not struggle. Perhaps even he understood that sacrifice was sacred. With all her might, Nuwa heaved the forelegs upward, planting them at the corners of the earth, where they rose like mountains to hold the sky once more. Still, the floods roared. The broken seams between heaven and earth had torn rivers from their beds. Water rampaged across plains and forests. The people could not rebuild with the world underwater. Nuwa, nearly spent, gathered reeds from the eastern marshes, dried them in the sacred fires, and burned them to ash. With the blackened dust, she created a divine dam, sealing the gaps, stilling the waters, commanding the floods to retreat. The work was endless. Her breath became labored, her hands scorched and trembling. She poured herself into every motion, a goddess unraveling thread by thread. For each stone laid into the sky, a spark of her spirit dimmed. For each support placed, a part of her strength was spent. But she endured. She endured for the children she had shaped from clay. For the nobles and the commoners, the strong and the meek. For every mortal who looked up to the sky and dared to hope. At last, the fires faded. The cracks sealed. The sky rose once again, crooked in the northwest, the earth forever tilted to the southeast, yet whole. The stars returned to their paths. The floods receded. Life, fragile but undaunted, began again. Exhausted beyond measure, Nuwa fell to the earth, her divine robes tattered, her hair streaked with soot and ash. She looked upon the world, broken but breathing, and smiled. For though her hands were blistered and her soul drained, her children would live. When Nuwa's work was done, the world she had saved was not the same. The heavens, though whole again, now tilted slightly, as if bowing to the weight of what had been endured. The earth, once perfect in its balance, now bent under the strain of the broken pillars, its shores and mountains reshaped by divine hands. The rivers, once familiar in their winding paths, now flowed eastward, as though reaching for an unknown horizon, their waters carving new landscapes. The stars, too, had shifted, their ancient constellations rearranged by the strain of the cosmic rift, tracing new patterns in the sky. The world was not perfect. It would never be the same as before the War of the Gods, when Nuwa had walked among her creations in harmony. Yet, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, there was something new, a fragile hope that whispered through the air like the first breeze of dawn. The people of the world, though scarred by the floods and fire, rose from the ruins. They returned to the land, rebuilding villages where once there had only been ash. Where the earth had cracked, seeds were planted, and new life began to sprout, tendrils of green creeping from the dirt like fingers reaching for the sun. Animals returned, though they were altered by the chaos they had witnessed. The beasts that roamed the plains and forests carried in their eyes the ancient wisdom of survival, of knowing that even in the darkest storms, life would find a way. The sky above, though not as it had been, now had a quiet majesty all its own. The constellations twinkled in unfamiliar patterns, as though they were the new songs of the heavens, songs born of the sacrifice that had repaired them. They held a new mystery, one that Nuwa's children could only begin to understand. In the moonlight, the stars whispered of Nuwa's love for her creations, her unwavering devotion, and the sacrifice that saved them all. The earth, too, had changed. The rivers now carried their waters eastward, but they did not rush with the same furious current as before. Instead, they flowed with a slow, steady grace, as though learning patience from the chaos they had endured. The mountains stood taller, their peaks etched with the memory of the fallen sky, casting long shadows over the land. The winds, once wild with storms, now blew gently across the fields, carrying with them the scent of fresh rain and the promise of new beginnings. Though the world was forever altered, it was still alive, and life, in all its forms, from the smallest blade of grass to the tallest tree, from the humblest mortal to the proudest god, endured. It survived, not because it was untouched by the calamity, but because it had been nurtured by the love of a goddess who gave everything to restore balance. And as the years passed, Nuwa's legacy lived on, not only in the restored world, but in the hearts of those she had saved. The mortals she had breathed life into, the gods who had watched her sacrifice, and even the elements themselves, all remembered her. She was not just the creator or the healer. She was a symbol of balance, a reminder that from the deepest destruction can come the most profound rebirth. The goddess of creation and restoration had saved the world, but in doing so, she had also taught it the most important lesson of all, the delicate balance between chaos and order, and the eternal truth that life, even in its most fragile form, is worth fighting for. In the ages that followed Nuwa's heroic restoration, her name became a sacred song woven into the fabric of the world. The mortals who once toiled under the weight of cosmic imbalance now revered her as the eternal protector, the goddess who had not only shaped them from clay, but had also, through her great sacrifice, preserved their existence. Her deeds, once a distant memory, became etched in stone and scripture, passed down through generations, growing ever brighter in the hearts of her followers. The temples that rose in her honor were places of peace and healing, their towering spires crowned with symbols of balance, circles, squares, and spirals, representing the harmony between heaven and earth, light and dark, life and death. Paintings and sculptures of Nuwa adorned the inner sanctums, showing her with hands outstretched in creation, her eyes full of compassion. Festivals were held, where the people would gather to offer prayers of gratitude, burn incense, and present gifts in her name, honoring her as the giver of life and the mender of the world. But Nuwa's influence did not end in stone or chant. Her presence lingered in the winds that whispered through the valleys, in the rivers that curved through the land, in the very shapes of the clouds above. Though her form was no longer seen, her spirit remained as an invisible force guiding the flow of nature, balancing the elements with the quiet wisdom of a mother watching over her children. Ascension beyond mortal sight. When the time came for Nuwa to ascend beyond mortal sight, she did not leave the world in sorrow. Her form faded into the ether, her spirit rising like a mist toward the heavens she had once prepared. The gods watched as she ascended, knowing that her journey had come full circle. They, too, had learned from her that creation was not a singular act, but an ongoing dance of preservation, compassion, and balance. It is said that Nuwa's ascent was like the fading of twilight, the moment when the last light of day slips into the night. Her essence became one with the cosmos, blending into the very fabric of the universe. And though she was no longer visible to the mortal eye, the light of her love and sacrifice remained, shining through the hearts of those who continued to honor her name. Her myth and the laws of nature in the world Nüwa left behind. Her myth explained the laws of nature. The tilted sky was a reminder of the fragile balance between chaos and order, the way the earth and heavens could be torn asunder, yet still find a way to be restored. The rivers that flowed eastward, once a sign of the world's distortion, now represented the endless flow of life, always changing, always moving forward, yet always returning to its source. The animals, the plants, and the humans, in their diversity and unity, became living embodiments of Nuwa's teachings, that life is precious, fragile, and deserving of care. Her myth also celebrated the divine compassion at the heart of the cosmos, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming destruction, there is always the possibility for renewal. Through her sacrifice, Nuwa had demonstrated that true power comes from selflessness, that the act of creation is a constant process of giving and healing. She had not only mended the sky, but had woven the very threads of compassion into the fabric of existence, teaching mortals and gods alike the value of love, patience, and balance. A guardian for all time in the quiet moments of dawn, when the sun touched the earth with its first light, and in the stillness of dusk, when the world sighed with the weight of the day's end, Nuwa's spirit continued to watch over all things. She was no longer just a goddess of creation, but a guardian of life itself, a protector of balance, whose love for her creations transcended time and space. Her myth endured as a living legacy, one that would be told and retold, growing more luminous with each telling, a story that would never fade because it was woven into the very nature of the world. Through Nuwa, humanity learned that even in the darkest times, there is always the possibility of restoration, and that the divine presence lives on, not in the heavens above, but in the hearts and minds of those who walk in her footsteps, the children of the earth, the sons and daughters of her clay. Nuwa's myth is a celebration of life, of creation, and of the eternal bond between the divine and the mortal. In her sacrifice, she gave the world both a beginning and a future, ensuring that the balance of the cosmos would never again be shattered. And so, in the quiet hum of the world's heartbeat, Nuwa endures, not in the heavens, but in the heart of every living being who remembers her.